You remember the weight of silence, don't you? Not the comfortable kind, the kind that fills rooms when you enter them. The kind where love wasn't absent but conditional, measured, withheld like currency you could never quite earn enough of to feel safe. You learned early that your existence was something to apologize for, that taking up space required justification, that being seen meant being scrutinized. And somewhere in that childhood home, whether through words spoken or the more devastating words left unsaid, you absorbed a truth that wasn't true at all, that you were fundamentally, inexplicably, undeserving of unconditional love. This is the psychology of the hated child, and if that term makes you flinch, if you want to close this video because hated feels too strong, too dramatic, too much, stay with that discomfort. Because that impulse to minimize, to soften, to make your pain more palatable for others, that's the first symptom we're going to talk about. Here's the paradox that drives everything. The strategies you develop to survive being the hated child, the hypervigilance, the perfectionism, the ability to read rooms like sacred texts, the practiced invisibility, these adaptations saved you. They got you through. But now, decades later, those same survival mechanisms have become the bars of your prison. The thing that protected you is now the thing slowly suffocating your capacity for genuine connection, rest, and self-acceptance. You've spent so long bracing for impact that you can't remember what it feels like to simply exist without armor. And the cruelest part, you've become so fluent in the language of self-erasure that you don't even recognize it as a learned behavior anymore. It just feels like who you are. Let me be clear about what we're actually discussing here. The hated child isn't always the child who was physically abused or screamed at daily, though it can be. More often, it's the child who experienced what psychologists call emotional neglect and conditional positive regard, a term coined by Carl Rogers to describe love that comes with strings attached. You were loved if you were quiet, if you achieved, if you didn't have needs, if you made your parents look good, if you didn't remind them of their own failures or trigger their unresolved trauma. This creates what attachment theorists identify as disorganized attachment, a paradoxical state where the person who is supposed to be your source of safety is simultaneously your source of fear or shame. Your nervous system never learned the fundamental pattern of I need help, I reach out, I receive comfort, I feel safe. Instead, you learned, I need help, I reach out, I am rejected or shamed, I must hide my needs to survive. Think of your developing brain like a house being built during an earthquake. The foundation, your sense of self-worth, your internal working model of relationships, was laid during constant tremors of unpredictability. So you built compensatory structures. You developed what's called hypervigilance, a constant scanning of your environment for threat cues, reading microexpressions, tone shifts, the barometric pressure of other people's moods. Your autonomic nervous system became biased toward detecting danger, specifically social danger. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, became overactive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational assessment, learned to constantly narrate a story of your inadequacy. And here's where it gets neurologically fascinating. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern recognition. Your brain, remarkably adaptive, was simply learning the rules of your specific environment. In a household where love was conditional, where your presence seemed to irritate or burden, hypervigilance wasn't dysfunction. It was the most intelligent response available to a developing child with no power and no escape route. You also likely developed what psychiatrist Donald Winnicott called the false self, a carefully curated version of you designed to be acceptable, lovable, non-threatening. The real you, with authentic needs and feelings and messiness, went underground. You became a masterful performer, always slightly outside yourself, watching yourself interact, adjusting in real time based on how others responded. You learned to harvest your sense of worth entirely from external validation because internal worth was never modeled or affirmed. But let's talk about what this actually costs, not in abstract terms, but in the texture of your daily existence. There's a kind of grief that the hated child carries that has no name and no ritual. It's the grief of never having had a childhood where you were simply celebrated for existing, where your needs were met before you learned to hide them, where you could be loud, inconvenient, demanding, imperfect, and still be held with tenderness. This grief sits in your chest like a stone you've carried so long you've mistaken it for an organ. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, A despair so deep it becomes existential, a despair not just about circumstances, but about the self. For the hated child grown into an adult, there's a similar ontological wound. You don't just doubt your lovability in this moment, you doubt your fundamental right to exist as you are. Your presence feels like an imposition. Your needs feel like moral failures. Your vulnerability feels like weakness that deserves punishment. You sacrifice authenticity on the altar of belonging over and over in ways you don't even recognize anymore. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You agree with opinions that violate your values. You contort yourself into whatever shape seems required by the room you're in. And then you go home and feel empty, confused about why connection never feels real, never feels nourishing. It's because you never brought yourself to the table. You brought the false self, the acceptable version, and that version can receive approval but never true intimacy. The core fear is this: if I show up as I actually am, with my needs, my boundaries, my complexity, my darkness, my desires, I will be rejected. And rejection to the nervous system of someone with your history doesn't just feel bad, it feels annihilating. It triggers the primal terror you felt as a child when disapproval meant the withdrawal of resources necessary for survival. So you live in a constant state of what psychologists call proactive appeasement. You're always trying to earn your right to stay. In relationships, in jobs, in friendships, you're perpetually auditioning, proving your value, terrified that if you stop performing, people will finally see what you believe to be true, that you're fundamentally disappointing. Rest becomes impossible because rest means dropping the performance, and dropping the performance means risking exposure. So you stay busy, useful, needed. You make yourself indispensable. You never say no, you never ask for help. And you wonder why you're so tired all the time, why joy feels like something you observe in others but can't quite access yourself. Now let's map how this shows up in your adult life in undeniable, specific ways, because the hated child doesn't stay in childhood. They become adults with particular patterns, and I want you to see if you recognize yourself here. You might be someone who apologizes constantly, for taking up space, for having opinions, for existing in ways that might inconvenience others. Sorry becomes punctuation in your speech, a verbal tic born from the belief that your presence is inherently burdensome. You apologize before asking questions. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. You apologize for other people's choices. You become an adult who struggles with success more than failure, because failure confirms your internal narrative. See, you knew you weren't good enough. But success creates cognitive dissonance. It doesn't match the story. So you self-sabotage right before breakthrough moments, or you minimize your achievements, or you suffer from what's called imposter syndrome, the persistent belief that you fooled everyone and it's only a matter of time before you're exposed as a fraud. You might be someone who overfunctions in relationships. You're the therapist friend, the problem solver, the one who always shows up but never asks anyone to show up for you. You've learned that your value lies in your utility, so you make yourself useful. You give and give and give, and then feel resentful and confused when relationships still feel one-sided. But you never actually ask for reciprocity because asking feels dangerous. You become an adult with what therapists call boundary dissolution. You can't tell where you end and others begin. You absorb other people's emotions like a sponge. You feel responsible for managing everyone's comfort. When someone is upset, even if it has nothing to do with you, you feel compelled to fix it, to make yourself smaller, to smooth it over. The idea of saying, "that's not my responsibility," feels selfish, cruel, impossible. You might be someone who intellectualizes everything, including your own pain. You can analyze your trauma with impressive psychological terminology. You understand the mechanisms. You've read the books, but you still can't cry. You can't let yourself feel it without immediately jumping to, "but it wasn't that bad," or "other people had it worse." This is called emotional bypassing, using psychological insight as armor against actually processing emotion. You become an adult who tests people, not consciously but constantly. You withdraw slightly to see if they'll pursue you. You create small conflicts to see if they'll stay. You push boundaries to find the breaking point, because at least then you'll know where you stand. Better to orchestrate your own rejection than to be blindsided by it. This is the anxious avoidant paradox, desperately wanting connection while unconsciously sabotaging it. You might be someone who feels allergic to receiving. Compliments make you uncomfortable. Gifts feel like debt. Help feels like weakness. Someone doing something kind for you without being asked triggers anxiety rather than gratitude because you're waiting for the bill. You learned early that everything came with conditions, so you refuse to be indebted. You stay in control by staying self-sufficient, even when it's slowly killing you. Here's what's crucial to understand. These aren't personality traits. These are coping strategies. These are intelligent adaptations to an environment that was unsafe. Your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It learned the rules of your environment and optimized for survival within those constraints. The work now isn't to shame yourself for these patterns. The work is to witness them, to see them clearly without the reflexive minimization, to stop gaslighting yourself with "it wasn't that bad" and instead allow the truth: it was bad enough to shape everything about how you move through the world. So what does healing actually look like? Not the Instagram version with affirmations and bubble baths, but the real, unglamorous, terrifying work of rewiring a nervous system that has been primed for rejection. First, you have to grieve, not quickly, not cleanly, but thoroughly. You have to mourn the childhood you didn't have, the unconditional love you deserved and didn't receive, the version of yourself that went into hiding so deep you forgot they existed. This grief will ambush you at unexpected moments. When you see a parent tenderly comforting their child in public, when you watch a movie where someone is loved despite being difficult, when you finally feel safe enough with someone to let your guard down and realize how exhausting it's been to keep it up. You have to practice what therapists call inner child reparenting. This isn't metaphorical. You literally have to become the parent you needed, offering yourself patience when you make mistakes, comfort when you're scared, celebration when you succeed, and most radically unconditional presence when you're messy, needy, or too much. You have to learn to speak to yourself the way you wish someone had spoken to you then. You have to do the work of shadow integration, Carl Jung's term for acknowledging and reclaiming the parts of yourself you learned were unacceptable. Your anger, your needs, your selfishness, your boundaries, the parts that take up space, the parts that demand, the parts that say no without justification. These aren't character flaws to overcome, they're essential aspects of wholeness that you exiled to survive. You have to consciously practice vulnerability in relationships, even when every cell in your body screams danger. You have to learn to say, "I need help," and then tolerate the unbearable discomfort of waiting to see if help arrives. You have to practice staying present when someone offers you kindness instead of deflecting. You have to resist the urge to test, to withdraw, to protect preemptively. And perhaps most difficult, you have to choose softness. In a world that taught you that only hardness kept you safe, you have to slowly, experimentally, courageously practice letting your guard down. Not with everyone, discernment is wisdom, but with someone, with yourself. You have to learn that safety isn't the absence of vulnerability. Safety is the presence of people who don't punish you for being human. The psychologist James Hollis writes, "We are not here to fit in, be well-balanced, or provide exempla for others. We are here to be eccentric, different, perhaps strange, perhaps merely to add our small piece to the great mosaic of being." Healing means rejecting the false binary you were given, be acceptable or be alone. It means discovering the third option you weren't shown, that you can be fully yourself, complex and contradictory and imperfect, and still be worthy of love. Not because you've earned it, not because you've performed well enough, but because worthiness was never something you needed to achieve. It was your birthright, stolen from you before you had words to name the theft. The goal isn't to become fixed. The goal isn't even to become fearless. The goal is to become whole, to integrate the scared child, the protective adolescent, the defended adult, and the tender self underneath it all into one coherent person who can move through the world without constant terror of erasure. You were never the problem. You were a child trying to solve an impossible equation. How do I make myself lovable to someone who has decided I'm not? And when you couldn't solve it, you concluded the failure was yours. It wasn't, it never was. If this video resonated with the part of you that still remembers what it felt like to be small and unseen, share it with someone who needs permission to stop apologizing for existing. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the hidden architecture of human pain and possibility. And remember, your presence was never the problem. Their inability to cherish it was. You were always worthy of being loved exactly as you were. You still are.